Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of Benjamin Harrison and the focus is Senator Harrison. The year is 1880. It's an election year, and the incumbent president, Rutherford Hayes, had taken a one-term pledge, so he was on his way out. And that opened the door wide open for a whole bunch of other people to get into the mix. Heading into the convention in Chicago that year, there were three main candidates for the nomination for the Republicans. You had James Blaine, the former Speaker of the House from Maine, John Sherman from Ohio, and the former President Ulysses Grant, who had served his 2 terms and then had left the presidency, went on a family trip to Europe, and in fact all the way around the world, 2 years abroad, but now back, still very popular, and some people pushing Grant to have a chance to come back for a 3rd term. Benjamin Harrison was not a candidate in this cycle, but he was involved. In fact, he was leading the Indiana delegation to that convention in Chicago. Well, for the first day of balloting for the presidential nomination, there was literally no movement. You had Blaine and Grant out front, Sherman sort of a distant third, but nobody was breaking through, no path to a majority. So the next day, Wisconsin threw in a dark horse candidate. Congressman James Garfield of Ohio was tossed into the mix on the 34th ballot. Benjamin Harrison got involved in the very next ballot by rallying the Indiana delegation to the cause of James Garfield, and Indiana tossed 27 votes in the direction of Garfield. This helped begin a stampede for Garfield, and on the very next ballot, the 36th, everybody except the Grant supporters jumped onto the Garfield bandwagon, and he was the nominee for the Republican Party. Well, Benjamin Harrison was happy to support Garfield. And in fact, he was going to play a critical role in the state of Indiana. Indiana and New York, 2 of the most important swing states in this election, and Harrison was really the leader of the Garfield campaign. And this was not a surprise. They had a lot in common. They had both been originally from Ohio. They had both served valiantly as colonels in the Civil War on the Union Army. Both had been elevated to the general officer level in the war before they left it. They were aligned politically, and frankly, they liked each other. So this was a natural fit, and they had a robust correspondence during the campaign where Harrison was really doing the bidding, trying to push Garfield to the election in Indiana, which he won, and Garfield won the presidency that fall. Well, Garfield actually wanted Harrison to perhaps be coming into his cabinet, which was a real headache for Garfield. There were factions all over the party vying for spots in the cabinet. He didn't really know which way to go, and Harrison, though, was somebody that he wanted. But Harrison wasn't so sure. The recent election brought Republican majority to the state legislature in Indiana, and that state legislature was about to pick the new senator for an open seat from Indiana, and that's the job that Harrison wanted. So he was kind of pushing the president-elect off, waiting to see what would happen when the state legislature got together in January of 1881. Now, there were other candidates in the mix for this position, but really the momentum seemed all in Harrison's direction, and by the time that they actually voted on the 18th of January, everyone else had pretty much dropped out. It was an easy decision for the legislature, and Harrison became the senator-elect from Indiana. But he still had a choice to make because Garfield still came back and said, you know what, I'd still like you in my cabinet. Harrison thought about it, and he said, Mr. President-elect, I'm sorry. I'm going to go with the state of Indiana. I'm going to represent them. I'll be your ally in the Senate, but he's going to go into the Senate, and that's what he did. On March 4th of 1881, Inauguration Day, he had his family with him, wife Carrie, his son Russell, his daughter Mamie in the Senate chamber when he took his oath of office. Everybody then went outside where Garfield was sworn in as the 20th President of the United States, gave his inaugural address. Now, the Senate had some immediate action to take, so Harrison the very next day took his seat number 20 at the front of the Senate chamber, because they had some nominees that for the cabinet and some other key positions that the Senate came into session, they voted on, they approved, but then they went home, went into recess, which was typical at the start of a new term. Congress would go out of session until December when they would come back, so Harrison went back to with the family back to Indianapolis, got his law practice up and running, and everything came to a halt. July 2nd, 1881, when the country was shocked to find out that President Garfield had been shot in the back at the train station in downtown Washington, D.C. The country was shocked. Benjamin Harrison dropped everything he was doing, got on a train. He wanted to see his friend, his president, to see how he was doing. When he got there, he found out that the attempted assassination, was by a deranged office seeker by the name of Charles Guiteau. Guiteau had convinced himself that he was somehow critically responsible for Garfield winning the presidency and that he deserved a top spot in the administration. In fact, Benjamin Harrison knew of Guiteau. He had seen him in Washington. He said that I met him frequently about the Riggs house. He used to accost me every day about his prospects and was really a nuisance. This was common for Guiteau, and this time, in his own mind, he took it into his own hands. If he could kill the president, maybe Chester Arthur then as president, that would then open up a spot for him. In the meantime, everybody's focusing on the health of the president, who is in immense pain. He's in a nursing room basically built around him in the White House. But he actually was getting better. After the first few days, the signs were pretty optimistic, to the point where by mid-July, Harrison and most others actually decided to go back home. They thought this thing was going to pass and the president would recover. That would not be the case. The main bullet that got into Garfield's back was not actually the cause that eventually caused his demise. It was his doctors. His doctors taking their unsanitary hands and tools and instruments, trying to find the bullet in Garfield's back, which they never found, introduced infection. And that infection grew, it spread, it decimated the president's body. By late July and early August, he took a real downturn. And by September, it was over. The president of the United States died, and the country went into mourning. That included the senator from Indiana, Benjamin Harrison, who was leading the service, the memorial service in Indianapolis at the Grand Opera House, in which he told the people there, "I see sorrow in every face." It is not often that a calamity is so widely felt as this. It has cast darkness not only on the porticos of the rich, but it has come into the humblest home with its shadow. This was a devastating moment for the country. Harrison got on a train. He went back to Washington for the state funeral of the deceased president, then in fact got on a train escorting the body to Mentor, Ohio, where Garfield was eventually laid to rest. The new president, Chester Arthur. Now, this was a career spoilsman who had never held political office before being vice president of the United States. And now he was frankly terrified of being the president. This was way over his head, but he took on the responsibility, and in one key area, he really came through. And this was in the area of civil service reform. After the assassination by Guiteau and all of these problems with patronage year after year, which Chester Arthur had actually been a part of on the machine side of politics, he now flipped and he embraced civil service reform. He embraced the Pendleton Act, which came through Congress, which started the path of civil service reform, which, by the way, Benjamin Harrison was a strong supporter for, but it was really sort of the lone highlight in the presidency of Chester Arthur, who was ready to get out of office as soon as he possibly could, as soon as his 3 years were up. During that time, of course, there was other business going on, and the area that was most interesting in the Senate for Benjamin Harrison had to do with issues related to veterans. There was nobody more supportive of veterans causes in the United States Congress than Benjamin Harrison. He believed that the country still owed these veterans, frankly, as much as they could possibly give. So when an act called the Pensions Arrears Act came forward, he was a strong supporter. And this act, when it passed, actually opened up the door for many more people to be eligible on the pension rolls. It basically said two things. If you have an injury or an illness today that you could trace back to the Civil War, even though that was a couple of decades ago, then you would be eligible for a pension. The second part was the arrears part, and we'd give you back pay associated with that as well. So it was very generous. So that brought in a whole bunch of folks applying for pensions who had never done it before. This created a real problem for the Pension Bureau and the executive branch to try to make sure there was no fraud, that these were all legitimate. And so they were going through the cases, they would reject some, but this time Congress put in a backdoor. If the Pension Bureau denied your pension, you could come to a congressman, a senator, a member of the House. They could put forward a bill. If it passed the Congress, that law would entitle you to a pension. Nobody was more generous along these lines than Benjamin Harrison. In fact, he put forward more than 100 of these such bills, and in his mind, this was no time to use an apothecary's scale to weigh the rewards of men who saved the country. Being overly generous, That was fine. It was appropriate as far as Benjamin Harrison was concerned, even on those borderline cases. Another area that was interesting to Harrison at the time was statehood. For a bunch of these large territories in the West, some of which had now had population levels that typically would be sufficient to bring in a new state, like South Dakota, for example. And Harrison thought it was time to get these states into the Union. There was politics at play here. The feeling was most of these states would lean Republican. That could have been one of the motivations for Harrison, but it was also the motivation for the Democrats to continuously say no, and for now at least, they had the power in Congress to block those new states. That would still take a little bit longer to happen. On the personal front, for Benjamin Harrison, his family expanded. Both of his children actually got married during this time. His son Russell got married to Mae Saunders. She was the daughter of another senator, Senator Alvin Saunders from Nebraska. So they tied the knot. Not long after that, Harrison's daughter Mamie got married to her longtime beau by the name of Robert McKee. Next national election took place in 1884. Harrison, of course, stumping for the Republican. James Blaine finally got that nomination. He went up against Grover Cleveland, incredibly close election, and sure enough, it was the Democrat, Cleveland, the governor of New York, who won the presidency. First time a Democrat had been elected to the presidency in almost 30 years. 1856 was the last time. Democrats on the rise not only nationally, but also in Indiana. In fact, they captured the state legislature and went through with a gerrymander of the districts to try to ensure that they would hold on to the power in the state legislature. What did this mean for Benjamin Harrison? Well, all of a sudden, his Senate seat was at risk because those state legislators actually pick the next senator when his term comes up in a couple of years. So he's pretty worried about this. In fact, the 1886 state campaign was one of the most animated involved for Benjamin Harrison because he was not going to take this gerrymander lying down. He believed he was going to fight that gerrymander and still elect enough Republicans to hold on to the state legislature so he could save his Senate seat. And it was a really impressive campaign. He crisscrossed the state. He actually did help the Senate pick up some Republican seats that they were not expected to win against these Democrats, but it still wasn't quite enough. By the way, on the campaign trail, one of the reasons why he was most effective, that waving the bloody shirt. Again, he was not shy about doing that. The cause of the Civil War was still alive, especially if that meant that he could win election. Again, he got a lot of praise, even though he fell a little bit short. George Townsend from the Cincinnati Enquirer wrote that when Harrison rises to speak, you see that he is broad-shouldered, full-chested, healthy and strong, square-headed, firmly planted on his feet, aggressive, loud, and incisive, very much a leader of men. And others around the country were impressed that Harrison got even as close as he did to getting that Republican majority in Indiana, which was going to be a key in the next presidential election, Indiana being a swing state. A senator from Kansas by the name of P.B. Plum wrote to Harrison, "You carried the state handsomely, and I believe it is now possible to again put Indiana in the list of Republican states looking forward. Seriously, the victory won in electing a state ticket puts you in the line of presidential promotion. It seems to me that you and a good New Yorker would make an invincible team." Some folks are already talking Harrison now for 1888. He had a couple of backers that came out ready to raise money for him. One by the name of Wharton Barker. He was a money man from Philadelphia. In Indiana, Lewis Michener was ready to go raise money. They're talking 1888. A presidential run for Benjamin Harrison? That is the story for another day. That's Benjamin Harrison and Senator Harrison from the life of Benjamin Harrison. For more presidential chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher and this is Presidential Chronicles.